I'm going to need some beeswax to polish the pegs on the Redwood violin. And so I'm in Santa Rosa today to meet Ann Jereb, who is very active in the Sonoma County Beekeepers Association.
My name is Ann Jereb, and I have been beekeeping, I think this is going on my 8th year. My interest in beekeeping started, 8 years ago when a large swarm flew into our backyard and into my neighbor's arbor, and I was in such awe. The bees actually ended up coming back into my contorted hazelnut, and I contacted a beekeeper from the Sonoma County Beekeeping Association, and he came out and put the bees into a box and decided he'd come back in 2 weeks to get them, and I fell in love with them while they were here and convinced him to leave them for as long as he could, and he came out periodically and checked on them and basically taught me the beginnings of what I needed to know about beekeeping. And I guess it was almost 2 years later that he actually came to retrieve the bees, and at that point Don and I decided that we would get into beekeeping. So we took a beekeeping class at the junior college, and we caught a swarm for our first hive of bees, and the rest is history. I've been beekeeping ever since, and I'm very involved in the Sonoma County Beekeeping Association, which is a wonderful organization. The Beekeeping Association, basically, their main focus is on education and educating the public about the importance of bees to us human beings and the ways that we can help bees by keeping healthy pollinator plants in our gardens and not spraying pesticides and this type of thing. We are at about 500 members. We meet once a month, and then we have smaller groups based by locale, and they meet once a month and do hands-on work where they'll go into an apiary like today, and a small group of them would go through a hive and learn from it and increase their talents that way. So this little hive was a swarm that we captured last September. Not really knowing if they were going to make it, I ended up giving them a frame of some food and a frame that already had some wax comb drawn on it, because when a group of bees leave their hive or swarm, they come with nothing. So it was probably a fairly young queen, and little to my surprise, she came booming back this spring. The hive is just busting at the seams with babies, and she looks very healthy, and the hive is growing. At this point today, since I've already added them to a larger box, I'm going to be probably adding a third box on top. There are a lot of what we call brood, which is baby bees that are going to be hatching. Already started, but will be hatching in the next week, and they need more space. They kind of need more elbow room. So that's what I'm going to do today. Beekeepers wear all kinds of protective gear, anywhere from nothing at all to just a veil. I tend to suit up all the way. When people say, as a beekeeper, do you get stung by your bees? And I go, well, yeah. But we only really get stung if they are threatened or hurt. Like if we move a frame in such a way it squishes a bee, her injury sets off pheromones, sense in the hive that there's something wrong or they're under attack. If I were to eat a banana before I went in, that is the scent of their alarm pheromone, and my breath would be setting off an alarm in the hive. The hive stays together because of the queen, and she has her own scent, which is called a pheromone. Bees fly out, they will forage anywhere from 2 to 5 miles from their hive, and they always come back to their hive, which is quite amazing to me. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the top box here. So this is what we call a lavender box. There's a certain amount of condensation that happens in the hive. The thought is the condensation will come up through this opening and be wicked by this lavender in the box, rather than landing on the bottom of this inner box and dropping back down on the bees. I gave them an empty frame last week. Once the nectar flow starts, which means plants are producing nectar, the bees go into gear and start building new wax comb, and there's nothing more beautiful than brand new wax comb. The little cells that have gold in them, that is what we call bee bread. The bees bring it in on their hind legs as pollen, and it's mixed with a little nectar and some enzymes, and it turns into a cultured product we call bee bread, and the bee bread is what they feed their babies.
Let me ask you a very basic question. What is the honey for?
The honey is their food in the wintertime. They basically stay in the hive, and they need to maintain the heat around the queen to about, well, normally it's 95, 94 degrees.
Wow.
So they work very hard to maintain that temperature. And they do that by detaching their wings from their wing muscles, and they basically exercise their wing muscles, which creates like a shiver, and that's how they create the heat in the hive. This is a frame, I'm not going to hold it out very long, but this is a frame with what we call brood on it. See this whole area that is kind of covered with a creamy, textured cover? Those are babies. So they surround the brood with a nice rainbow of nectar and some bee bread, and then she lays. Now see, this is a frame that's mostly nectar. You see how it glistens? So actually what I'm going to do today is I pulled that frame up. I am adding a new wired frame, which means they will have space to draw more comb on. This was what I gave them a week ago, and this is what they did with it in a week's time. Go ahead and close this box up. And in the hive, there are forager bees, which are the bees who travel out to get food. And there are called what we call nurse bees. And the nurse bees are responsible for taking care of the queen and feeding the babies. And once a bee is born, it's in the hive for about 22 days, performing various duties, anywhere from cleaning the cells, feeding the babies, taking out dead bees. And then they graduate to being a guard bee, which is at the front door, where they protect the hive and don't let foreign bees come in. Some hours of the day, every other bee is bringing in pollen. The pollen is made into what's called bee bread, and it's what they feed the babies with.
So can I ask you what's in your toolkit?
My tools consist of a hive tool. I have a smoker, which I don't use very often. Some beekeepers use it to let the bees know they're coming into the hive. They'll give a little puff at the entrance. I just use it if the bees get really riled up. And then I have all kinds of tools. I have a knife in case I have to cut some comb that's gotten stuck between two frames. Rubber bands. Sometimes we have to cut a piece of comb and attach it to a wired frame, and until it becomes totally attached by them again, we will put rubber bands, and that kind of helps it to stay there. That's kind of the contents of my toolkit.
So
pretty basic. This is the
really.
major piece of equipment. Yeah. If you'd like to come over here, there's a couple of bees here who are foraging. The genes are really varied within a hive. I mean, a queen creates all the worker bees, which are basically fertilized eggs. The male babies are unfertilized eggs. When she goes up on her maiden mating flight, she goes up in the air, about 30 feet up, to areas that have male bees, and it's called a drone congregation area. New queens will go up and will be mating with as many males as she can. She basically collects all of the semen that she will need for her entire life. She, at the height of laying, she will lay between 1,500 and 2,000 eggs a day. They're all half-sisters. They have all different fathers, right?
Interesting.
Right, and that's how they create genetic diversity, which is how they survive.
Right.
So that's why when you look in the hive, you'll see golden bees, you'll see dark bees, you'll see all different color-looking bees, because they've all come from different fathers. As many beekeepers as there are 10 times as many answers to beekeeping questions, because everyone tends to beekeep a little different, have their own different style, and their own different philosophies. I mean, one of the things I love about beekeeping is you're never done learning. You're always learning, and it's a wonderful endeavor.
Yeah, so if I wanted to start beekeeping, what would I have to do?
The first thing I would tell a new beekeeper is to read and read and read as much as you can, to learn as much as you can. And then the next important thing is to pick equipment, good equipment. The time that bees are purchased or caught via swarms is the springtime. So we're heading into swarm season, and what happens is the queen increases her laying. She's come out of winter, more bees are being born. Pretty soon the hive becomes crowded, and they realize that they need to find a new house. So what they do is they make a new queen. Just after the new queen cell becomes capped, the old queen and half of the bees in the hive will take off. And they go fly, and they often don't go fly very far. They'll land on a branch in a tree, and they form a very large grouping of bees. And then they send out scout bees to look for a final home. And when they find a final home, they communicate with one another by doing what's called a bee dance, and they dance on one another and communicate the direction, how far away and where it is in proximity to the sun, and then they all take off from there to find their final resting spot. We get what we call swarm calls, where people say, oh my God, I have this batch of bees in my backyard, what do I do? They'll call the association. The association has a list of people who are always ready to go out and help collect the bees. We put the bees in a box, and if we're going to keep them, we would bring them back and have a whole hive set up for them and put them in the new hive setup, and that's how you start beekeeping.
Great. Well, and the other thing we haven't talked about is honey.
Come fall is when you assess how much honey the bees colony is going to need to get through winter. And generally a good medium-sized hive, we tend to leave about 30 pounds of honey in the hive for them. Yeah, this is a frame. This is fall winter honey. Can you see how dark it is? And what I will be doing with this frame is crushing and straining the honey, which means I will cut the pieces of comb out and squish them between my fingers. This is a little bit lighter color. This honey left like this would last for centuries. You know, they found in the tombs, you know, in Egypt, honey. It will last forever and ever like this. Yeah, when they finish, this is called capping it over. This is a thin wax covering, and it keeps this honey preserved indefinitely. This is my lavender that I harvest every fall. But this is what we call a honey bucket. Honey is either spun in an extractor, or you can simply take the wax comb and mush it all up, breaking open the cover of the honey. And you set it in here. There's 3 different filters. So I would just set it in here, and the honey would drip through the filters down into the pot. And then once it's in the pot, I'd let it sit for a couple days for the air to surface. And then I open this little device, and honey pours out into the jars. Okay, so to wrap up our little meeting today, I brought you some honey. You can see this honey has sort of an auburn color to it. This was probably in between an early spring honey and a fall winter honey. Early spring honey tends to be very, very light in color, and fall winter honey tends to be very, very dark.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Honeybees work really hard to make us honey.
Should really appreciate.
Wow.
Straight from the hive. No processing.
That's delicious.
About how many bees do you think it took to make that much?
Well, I mentioned that I believe one honeybee makes about 1/12 of a teaspoon
In its life.
Wow.
in its lifetime. So I couldn't tell you how many bees that took to make, but it's quite remarkable.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then
Thank
once they
you,
bring it in,
bees.
then they have to dehydrate it from 83% water down to 17.
This has been absolutely fabulous. We're done.
So I know that you came because you needed wax to do some polishing on your
I do.
Redwood violin, and so I have a variety of samples of wax that you're welcome to choose. They're different colors. The lighter one is a very early spring, brand new wax.
Oh, it's beautiful. The light goes right through it.
And then you'll notice that there's a little bit more yellow golden wax.
It's
And
quite
then-
yellow.
And then lastly is just sort of a nice deep auburn color.
Wow, now this looks like a
wax.
piece of parmesan.
Yeah, doesn't it?
I better be careful where I store this.
And then I wanted to give you this little piece of honey comb, or wax comb,
Wow,
just
beautiful.
as a souvenir of
Oh, thank you.
the,
Thank you so much.
the amazing work that the bees do.
Yep.
The wax actually comes from they have little wax glands on their belly, and when their tummies are full of nectar, they need to be full. These wax glands secrete these little tiny glistening discs of wax. And then the bees take it and they put it in their mouth and they chew it and they shape it and they create
And
this
somehow
amazing
they know how to do that.
comb.
I mean,
Amazing.
that is amazing.
Every cell is perfect.
wow. Well,
Enjoy.
this is way more wax than I need for the Redwood violin, but it'll be fun experimenting with it.
Yes.
And I want to thank you so much for being part of this
Oh,
project.
You're very welcome. It's my pleasure. I look forward to seeing your violin.
Yes,
Yes.
soon.
Good.
Next few
Good.
weeks.
Thank you.
I can't see anything. Where am I?